to the ASEAN game. I'm your host, Ryan Walters, coming to you from the still very busy streets of Hanoi, where it's chaos down there, as it always is, but it's a little bit more wet chaos now than it was the last time we spoke. But luckily, as you can see, I'm sitting outside and it's not raining on me right now. But we're not here to talk about Vietnamese football, not yet. That's coming up very soon. No, we are still focused on the tournament of tournaments while we still have it. We're talking about the AFC Cup, where the Interzone semifinals just finished up and we saw the Central Coast Mariners move on. Here to talk about that and break everything down are two men who attended the matches in person. First, it's the guru of Gosford, James Dodd. Welcome back.
I'll take that. Thanks, Ryan. Good to be back.
And the orator of Odisha, Shibajee Das. Shib, good to have you back.
Thanks, Ryan. Finally, great again to be back in the ASEAN game.
And for those that are just listening and not watching, Shib is out fashioning all of us as he usually does. Shib, what top you got on today?
So this is Odisha FC away kit. So this has now become one of the most iconic AFC Cup kits of all time. After this is the kit they wore when they beat Mohun Bagan away 5-2.
And those are the memories that the Odisha fans will hang on to, because there wasn't a ton of glorious moments in this Interzone semifinal, which, again, I love this competition. I'm not going to miss these names and these long titles. But gents, let's go ahead and let's hop into this. Let's talk about it for folks that maybe weren't able to watch it, or just for some folks that want the insight of, again, you guys were both there. So this was a little bit more lopsided than I think we were hoping for, and that's largely because Central Coast went ahead and took advantage of playing the home leg as the first leg, where they came away 4-0 winners. Daco was the hero in that one, had a couple of goals, had an assist. Storm Rue also showed up in that one. James, for those that couldn't watch, which I assume is nobody listening, everybody watched this game, was it as one-sided as that score indicates?
Do you know what? I think if you looked at purely on the stats of the game, then it would appear that way. I think up until half-time, it was relatively even. I think the Mariners had the lion's share of possession and they looked the more dangerous team, but they've been like that most of the season domestically. So that wasn't really a surprise. I think Mark Jackson said after the game, actually, that he kind of reminded the team and encouraged them at half-time to essentially go out and try and kill the tie if they could, because it would mean that it would make their lives easier going to India and not knowing the conditions and what sort of environment they would be playing in terms of the fans. And they did that. In the second half, they blew Odisha away. And I was actually quite disappointed with Odisha's showing. I was really surprised at how little Roy Krishna had in the game at all, in terms of any real clear goal scoring opportunities or what he was able to fashion for himself or to a lesser extent be provided by his teammates. And I think in the second half, I mean, we touched on Mikel Doka. He's been a revelation for the Mariners in the last, I'd say, 2 months. He came in at the start of the season as one of the sort of unknown South American players that they like to try and bring into the Mariners. They've had a good track record of it over the last, couple of seasons. And it looked as though he maybe wasn't really going to be the player that they thought. But instead of playing him at right back, they've shifted him higher up the field. So he has kind of less defensive responsibilities, and he's been absolutely sensational. He comes up with, 2 goals in this game, albeit one of them was a penalty. He's everywhere, and he adds so much to this Mariners team going forward. And he also does give that slight defensive balance to them if they have a winger who's going the other way and he can help out Storm Rue. And yeah, for me, the second half, they just blew them away. And to be honest, 4-0, it could have been more than that. And I think the sad thing is, and Shibajee will probably relate to this, it did kill the second leg of the contest. And I think that was obviously great from a Mariners perspective, but from the neutral watching the game, I dare say most of them would have liked if Odisha could find the back of the net. But yeah, I think the Mariners, as the scoreline suggested, were more than deserving of going through in such convincing fashion.
Yeah, like I say, I think even just one goal, and away goals weren't a thing here. That's not playing into things in AFC competitions this year, which is a bit of a shame in some ways. I did like that, and that would have helped Odisha a lot here had they gotten one. But like you say, I think they looked really out of sorts. Krishna was never really in it. Diego Mauricio is somebody else that I think the two of them ended up switching around in the second half just to try to get something going. They both looked really frustrated with the service they weren't getting. So, Shib, I'll come to you for this one. Was that a case of not being able to execute a game plan, or was that just that the early goals? Well, I mean, really, the goals weren't even that early. It took until the 36th minute to open the scoring in that first leg. So, from your perspective, Shib, what went wrong for Odisha in that first leg?
Yeah, so regarding the first leg in Gosford, Odisha were actually on the back foot even before the match started. The reason for this is, uh, if you look at the A-League schedule, Central Coast Mariners had their game postponed because of the AFC Cup. So A-League is really prioritizing the continental competitions now. On the other hand, unfortunately, Odisha FC they had to play their ISL match just days before flying all the way out to Australia, and it's not a easy ISL match. It's one of the most difficult away trips, going all the way down to southern India to play Chennai FC, which is like one of the longest trips in Indian football. So they were already physically very tired, and then had to take that long journey to Australia. Sergio Lovera even mentioned this in post-match press conference that that's one of the main reasons they were on the back foot. He admitted that obviously Central Coast Miners are a much more superior side to us, but we would not have lost 4-0 if we were physically like more used to what we were going to do in Australia. So that's one of the main reasons I think which really affected Odisha more than anything in the match, the physical conditioning.
Yeah, and for anybody that's made a 9,000 kilometer journey, it's not it's not easy to do, and then to get up and to play a football match, especially away. Yeah, I think that's understandable. James, like you were saying, I think it really would have been preferable for those of us hoping for a little bit of a better second tie that they could have gotten something in there, but I think it is completely understandable. And so it was with that with a 4-0 lead in their checked luggage, the Mariners made that 9,000K journey to India, and they were held scoreless in this one, which is the positive spin on it. Look, they didn't really need to get a goal in this. Like we were saying, the tie was already done and dusted, but Shib, was the clean sheet down to Odisha's defending, or was it more, in your opinion, that Central Coast just kind of didn't need a goal and they didn't really go for a goal in this one?
Again, quoting Odisha FC head coach Sergio Lovera on this to start. So he said post match that you must not forget we are currently living a dream. We we must not forget that Odisha is not one of the big clubs in Indian football. Only in 2021 they finished 11th in the league, and here they are now competing in continental competition. In some ways, for followers of Asian football, you can say Odisha FC is the Vainfore Kofu of India. They won the cup and then qualified to the AFC Cup. So kind of a very similar story. Both clubs also have purple as their club colors. Lots of similarity between them. Uh, so regarding yesterday's match, Odisha FC they had zero shots in the entire game. So that pretty much sums it really. I wouldn't like to take anything away from the defensive performance. Drawing against A-League champions is a big deal for any Indian club. But at the end of the day, I think it was all done and dusted really in the first leg.
Yeah, and a home field advantage that really could have played into things if it was an evening match, I think would have been much bigger. We should note that this kicked off in the afternoon, midweek, so not necessarily as big of a crowd as we would have expected. And Shib, I think you're used to this, but those of us watching on the broadcast, boy, that was some rain that was coming down. And it cleared up pretty quickly, but some pretty intense conditions for the team to try to play through there. But like you say, I think the clean sheet would be the positive takeaway. And it was a clean sheet largely because after playing the hero in the first leg, Mikel Daka missed a penalty in this one. And James, again, they didn't need a goal in this one. It's not that big of a deal, but do you think there'll be any knock-on effect from this?
It's hard to say. I think, you touched on there how good he has been, Mikel Doka. And I think, maybe the positives that the Mariners will take from this, aside from the fact that they're through to the final that isn't quite the final, is the way the competition works. I think Mark Jackson will take, comfort from the fact that he was able to give minutes and extended minutes to the likes of Ronald Barcelus, who has become quite something of a cult hero for the Mariners. He scored some really important goals for them, 2 against MacArthur, both in the AFC Cup and then in the league as well when they followed them up last weekend. And Ryan Edmondson is someone as well who's really still getting used to playing football in Australia. I mean, he was subbed on against MacArthur in that AFC Cup game and then subbed off again because he's still struggling to get to terms with the heat and the climate of which he's now playing in Australia. So I think there'll be some real positives for the Mariners to take away from it. The fact is they're also not playing now until the 30th of March when they play Sydney FC. So they've got a bit of a break. They can rest their legs because they're going to have some more travelling to come up to go to Kyrgyzstan as well. So I think there are a lot of positives to take, aside from the result, which is a massive positive in itself for Mark Jackson. But I did have a quick question for Shibajee, actually. The fact that Odisha are involved in such a tight title race at the moment in the Indian Super League as well, did that play into the psychological side of things for them coming in to play the Mariners? Like, did they treat the AFC Cup as a bonus, knowing that the title race is so congested in India at the moment? Was that always been their priority, do you think?
I don't think so. AFC Cup is very big in India. To be honest, if you look at the history of the competition, Indian clubs have performed really well. And Odisha FC, obviously, it's a big bonus for them to get out of their group stage because no one expected, and especially after the opening 2 losses. But they were, I think, confident of kind of getting some result in Australia before their final ISL game. That's what disrupted because Chennai FC, they are like when they went away to play the game, they are like second bottom in the league. So they have been like performing really poor. So no one expected Odisha FC to like lose, even though it's a very difficult away game any time of the year. It's a very long trip. Also, coincidentally, they lost in the 94th minute. Like it's a very late goal, and it was scored by Jordan Murray, a former Central Coast Mariners forward. So like lots of coincidences there, but that's really affected them psychologically, and I think it will unfortunately be a big effect for the rest of the season as well because they didn't expect to lose against Chennai FC. And now suddenly from the top of the table, now they have like come down to number 2 or number 3, and Mumbai City FC and Mohun Bagan are like much more experienced chasers in Indian football, and they're like going for the title now. And Odisha, like they're not used to finding themselves in this kind of position. Like normally they'll be fighting for the top 6, which is like a big thing to qualify for the playoffs, as A League and ISL has like the same format. But this year, like they are fighting for the title, but that defeat against Chennai FC has really like caused them in the AFC Cup, and I think for the rest of the ISL season as well.
Ryan, one thing I forgot to add actually, which was I suppose one thing that may come into play here ahead of the 2 legs away to Abdysh-Ata. I think there was obviously that halftime melee that occurred between the Mariners coaches Sergio Oliveira and Mark Jackson. The players got involved as well. I do wonder if the AFC might look at that and potentially any ramifications that may come from that, because there were quite a few players that were involved. I know Angel Torres was in the mix there as well, and there were a few suggestions that he may be aimed to headbutt one of the Odisha players. So I just wonder whether or not the AFC will look at that, and there could be some fallout going into the 2 legs of the final.
Yeah, I don't think we can talk about the second leg and not talk about the kerfluffle. And yes, I'm using the word kerfluffle because when else do we get to say kerfluffle? But Shib, you were there in person, and on the broadcast, it looked like, I mean, obviously there was a disagreement between the 2 coaches, but you were there closer than any of us. What kicked all of this off? Could you hear what they were talking about?
So you can see even after the post match, A-League officially like posted that clip. It's very rare for a league to post like fighting clips like that, but A-League did that, which is great of them. So it was pretty far from where I was at the media tribune. But what I could slightly notice was Sergio Lobera and Mark Jackson were both heading off to the tunnel and were having some conversation, like not friendly, but they were having some sort of conversation. And then a center coach minus substitute, I don't know who it was, and came and like shoved Lobera, and that's where it took off really. And obviously Odisha FC like playing at home, even though they didn't have the fans, that's like a was a big disadvantage for them because of the timing and all. Because if it was a night match, they would have probably had more than 15k easily. But they didn't. No team wants to get bullied at home, so obviously they would have done something about that.
Yeah, a conversation. I love how you phrased that one. They were having a conversation on the way to the tunnel. And I think we'll move on to the mailbag soon, because I think, like we were saying, this was all pretty much wrapped up after the first leg. But James, the one thing that I do want to touch on the kerfluffle, and again, I will bring up kerfluffle as many times as I can bring up kerfluffle. The thing that I want to bring up on this is those emotions. Yes, obviously this happens in football all the time. But to me, I think coming into this, one of the things that was maybe a criticism was that the Australian clubs wouldn't take it seriously enough. And to me, obviously you don't want to see any of that, but the positive I took out of that was that the Australian clubs are obviously taking this very seriously and they care a lot. Is that just me wanting them to like this competition, or is there actually something to that?
No, I think you're absolutely right. They are. They are really passionate about this competition, and I think you'll see that, you know, when the format is changed for next season, whichever Australian teams end up in that competition, I know Sydney FC have already kind of booked their spot by virtue of winning the Australia Cup. Then it's a pathway to glory for these clubs, and not only is it worth, you know, a financial boost for them if they were to go all the way and win it. The Mariners would certainly be benefiting from that, but I think you get a lot of players that have played around the world who, regardless of the standing of the competition, you know, let's say, for example, the AFC Cup, for someone like MacArthur's Valère-Germain has played in Monaco, he's played at the Champions League, you know, in Europe. He's played against and with some of the biggest players in world football, but the competitor in him playing in this tournament, they don't want to lose games, regardless of the competition they're playing in. And I think the Australian teams have really, really shown that this year. I mean, I mentioned Valère-Germain. I was there on the touchline when he sparked an all-in brawl between the Mariners and MacArthur because he was unhappy they'd lost. And I think you look at the way the fans have really kind of embraced the competition now. It did take a little while, to be honest, for the fans to get around the competition, mainly because, as Shib said with the Odisha support, they were midweek games. It sounds silly, but the weather wasn't great for a lot of the MacArthur and the Mariners games. It was torrential rain, I think, for pretty much every game that I was at in Gosford. So for the 3,000-4,000 people they're hoping to attract to those games, if it's really raining and it's a school night and it's a late finish, then maybe people don't want to take their kids to them. But the more the competition goes on, the more the fans realize the club is actually doing real and taking the competition seriously. I think, you know, you're going to see Australian teams from now on in, you know, future iterations of this tournament. They're going to take it seriously because the prize money on offer is good and it's success. You know, you don't really get a lot of Australian teams that have the opportunity to win trophies apart from, you know, the kind of same set of A-League clubs, the Mariners being the exception last year, who can challenge for domestic honours. So I think it's a fantastic opportunity, and I'm really hoping that, you know, there are so many clubs that have watched the Mariners and MacArthur this year that now say, I wouldn't mind being a part of that, because it's also a good, you know, it's a great, from a human perspective, it's also a great opportunity for these players to go and travel and see parts of the world that they would never go to, and families, stories to tell their families, and for the fans to be around it as well, and for fans to potentially travel and watch games. So I think it's been a real positive for Australian football.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think it's been great seeing them in this competition, and again, it's nice to see them involved in a kerfluffle and taking it very seriously. And speaking of taking things very seriously, I'll stop saying the word kerfluffle. I'm trying to get to 10. I think I might have gotten to 10. Anyway, we're going to move on to the mailbag now. We had a couple of questions come in on Insta for this one. For those of you following on X, formerly known as Twitter, get those questions in, folks. We don't want them all on the DMs and Insta. But speaking of sliding into the DMs, one Ta Lao, some guy in Thailand, I don't know. Anyway, Shib, he came in for you. He was asking, is Odisha's home stadium, Kalinga Stadium, is it the nicest in India?
Background story to Kalinga Stadium. So basically, Odisha state is like previously, like if you look at 10, 15 years back down the line, they were one of the most like underdeveloped states in India. So it's not like a major like part of the country or something. It's in eastern India. But then the local government, they thought we need to do something unique, because otherwise, why will people visit us? So they focused on something which no one in India has ever done. It's sports tourism. Because in India, sports is not a big deal. And by sports, I mean is like any sport, but not cricket. Because cricket, like everyone will play in India, except in few parts. So Odisha focused on sports except cricket, which is like a big deal in India. Like to avoid cricket altogether. So football and hockey, because hockey is our national sport, and then football popular sport. So they came up with this world class facilities, like invested money, and like Indian national hockey team's home is in Odisha, and even this Kalinga Stadium, the home of Odisha FC. So last year they even hosted the hockey World Cup in Odisha. And also, there's a city in Odisha state called Rourkela, which has the world's biggest hockey stadium. So Odisha is like crazy, like spending on like sports, like only state in India which is like focusing on this. And if you look at the Kalinga Stadium turf, is like absolutely world class, like beautiful pitch they got there. So definitely, like there's no comparison. Odisha, like home ground is like the pitch wise, like quality wise, may not be the biggest stadium in India, like capacity wise, but they got like the most beautiful stadium in India, for sure.
Interesting. I didn't know all that. And when you say hockey, I think of ice hockey because that's what I grew up watching. I'll have to make it out there for one of the hockey matches. And now I got another reason to go to Odisha. So well done, government, wanting the tourists to come in. We'll switch things up, not with where the questions are coming from. This one's on Insta yet again, but this one's for you, James. This is from Mike, just a random Mike on Insta. And he's saying if ACL was starting to make Aussie teams look bad with barely any of them getting into the knockout rounds, is AFC Cup making them look good?
It's a good question. I mean, you have to look. I guess you have to look at maybe the comparative level of each competition and some of the teams that are playing in the AFC Cup in comparison to, would they qualify and why didn't they qualify for the Asian Champions League? And I think if I was to just use the Australian teams that have competed this year, I think if the Central Coast Mariners were in the ACL this year, I think they would have given a really good account of themselves because it's the way they play and the players they have. I mean, you only have to look at domestically the difference between the Mariners and Melbourne City, for example. And Melbourne City were very, very close to progressing through to the group stages of the ACL this year. And I think if it was the Mariners in their position, the Mariners probably would have done a much better job of qualifying through to that next phase because that they are a better team. And so I just think, the issue that the A-League does have sometimes is that the turnover in players is so vast that, a team that maybe qualifies for one tournament, let's say if they qualify for the ACL, by the time it comes to them playing in the ACL the next season, the squad might be completely different from the one that got them there because by and large, all of those good players that helped them win the Premier's Plate have been picked off by teams overseas. So I do think that kind of continuity that is what teams struggle with when it comes to competing in tournaments for the next season. But I think it's definitely true that the standard is on the up, and I was just saying to Shibajee, there's going to be players that are not in the A-League next season that have really shone this year, and that's a shame. But as a fan who wants the league to grow, it's a good way of getting visibility for the teams in the competition. So I'm hopeful that if the Mariners can see off Abdysh-Ata over the two legs, get to the final, maybe win the final, then it might persuade a few of those players to stay around, a bit more money into the club as well to kind of persuade them to stay and sign new contracts. So I do think it's hard to compare the two, but based on what we've seen from the Australian clubs' participations in these tournaments this year, I'm confident that this is kind of the start of turning of a corner, hopefully.
Yeah, and that kind of plays into the last question that we had come in from Bodie again on Insta. And Shib, I'll put this one to you because obviously, you and I have been watching AFC Cup for a long time. James, I'm sure you have as well. But I'm curious from the Indian perspective on this one, Shib. Bodie, I'm assuming based on the name and everything, is from Australia and is asking about A-League teams. But he's saying, is A-League teams playing against Southeast Asian sides and Indian teams a better fit than playing against Korean, Japanese, and Chinese teams? He said it's a bit closer to home and could maybe start some rivalries. So I'm curious from your perspective, seeing the ISL sides play against Australian sides, is that something that, does it feel like a better fit in some ways?
So, firstly, regarding the A-League, many people might disagree with me, but I rate A-League very highly in Asia. Like, A-League for me is like after J-League and K-League, like nothing, and even like very close to them, like nothing comes like between like these three. Like these three are for me, these are the like toughest leagues in Asian football. So, firstly, A-League clubs playing in AFC Cup itself, like they are having an edge because A-League is very strong, to be honest. And then ISL clubs, if you take out Odisha FC like out of the equation, and if it would have been, for example, say a club like Mumbai City FC, who are much more experienced playing in Asian competitions, they could have put up a better fight because they have played and produced results in the AFC Champions League. Uh, Regarding the quality of like ISL and A League, I think both leagues have the same format, and also both leagues have a lot of connections because over the years, if you see recently, several players have moved from A League to ISL, which is a very unique trend. Like many Aussie players are playing in India now, and even guys like Roy Krishna, who are very successful in Australia, have moved on to play in India, and he's in India for a long, long time now. This is his third club in India: Mohun Bagan, Bengaluru FC, and now Odisha FC. So yeah, like I don't know whether like Aussie clubs to put them in which zone, but definitely if they play against Southeast Asian clubs and Indian clubs, then uh, for ASEAN and Indian clubs, it's good for them to compete against Australian clubs. Like they will be able to learn a lot more. But level wise, I think A League belongs to like competing against J League and K League clubs.
You brought up a point there that I really like about AFC Cup and Australian teams being in it, is that this could be another pathway for Aussie players out. And James, like you were saying, it's not necessarily something fans want to see, but as somebody that grew up in the States and watches a lot of MLS, I think MLS turned a corner when it started selling guys like Miguel Almiron to England, and when we could start to see these moves. And I don't think this would be the same setup, but the thing that I like about what you were saying there, Shib, is that if we get Central Coast Mariners into India, then Indian teams are going to see these players, and maybe we can see more movement within Asia for a lot of these guys, because I think the obsession is always Europe or bust with every single Asian player. And I really like that idea of A-League Cubs going to play in Bali, for example, which Central Coast Mariners did. Maybe one of the guys there sees that atmosphere, sees that crowd, realizes living on the beach and playing for this team might not be a bad way to go. And maybe we can see more movement there. So I really like that idea. And James, we'll get out of here just kind of on this one, just wrapping up this question in general. Do you think, and speaking of Bali, which is very close, and Keish has mentioned this on the pod before, getting down to Australia is closer to him in KL than it is to get to Japan. Could we see more rivalries form, do you think, with clubs from Southeast Asia?
Definitely. I think so. I mean, I think if you ask the fans and as someone who works for the league, it does, me as a supporter, it does rankle with you when you see players moving from the A-League to the Indian Super League, because you kind of think it's like it feels like it's a sort of a rival league. And I understand, Jason Cummings, for example, moving to Mohun Bagan, it was a lot more lucrative for him to move there. But I suppose that's kind of how it plays into the battle now. It creates those rivalries because fans see their players moving to go abroad. And like you say, it's not to Europe, it's to another team in Asia. And I think one thing I like about the AFC Cup is that it has been a really good eye-opener for me personally when I've been sitting there in stadiums watching teams that I would never have ordinarily seen before, but looking at the coaches and looking at the level of the coaching, looking at some of the standout players on the teams. And I think, for clubs that are operating on smaller budgets than European teams, it gives them a really good opportunity to go and scout some of these players, because it wouldn't surprise me if there were players for Bali United, for example, who impressed when they were playing against the Mariners. Then that's a first-hand scouting experience for the coaching staff of the Mariners and club officials to look at and say, hey, listen, maybe we can get a deal done here for X player on their team, because it's a really good opportunity to not only forge rivalries for me, but it's a great opportunity into that market to say, hey, listen, let's maybe have a bit of a relationship between the two clubs. And if there's players that we don't think necessarily are going to make it at our football club, they might be beneficial in your league, and vice versa. We can maybe pay you some money and take one of your better players off your hands. So I think it's been really good. And like you said, Shib hit the nail on the head. I think it's great to have that kind of rivalry, but also, a mutual respect between the nations that are playing in these competitions. And I think the longer that continues, the better, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, love it. And hopefully we can see some more of it in ACL 2 next year. But we're not done with AFC Cup yet, and we're not done with it on this show yet either. We will be talking more about it. But that is going to wrap things up for this very brief edition of the ASEAN game. A big thank you to my guests once again, James and Shib. Shib, sadly, we won't be able to have you back on for the ASEAN game, but maybe the Asian game, we'll be able to get you on that for the mothership, for the big podcast there. But do be sure to tune in to the next episode of the ASEAN game, which will be out in short order. And it's going to be talking about the odyssey that I've been on here in Vietnam, going to multiple stadiums, multiple games, and also a very interesting sit-down interview with Vietnamese national team captain and Hanoi FC legend Do Hung Dung. And I think you're going to like that one. I think it's going to be good. But until then, from Hanoi, it's bye for now.